welcome to another episode of That's So Bizarre. I'm your host, author, hippie, gypsy pirate, Becky Porchot. And I'm here today with my lovely guest, Susan Nichols. Hi, Susan.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, so Susan and I have been talking for probably a couple months about the things that she's experienced in her life. And I have to say, of anybody I've talked to, of all the stories I've talked to, hers are the most profound to me. Um, so why don't you tell everybody the story about the what we were
The
talking about,
clairvoyant
the
dreams.
clairvoyant dreams?
The
Yes.
clairvoyant dreams. The first clairvoyant dream that I recall having had to do with a little 8 or 9 year old girl.
Okay.
And she was a little Asian girl. I say that I suffer through clairvoyant dreams because the ones that I had were not pleasant. They were very frightening. I could not assist the people that I was dreaming about. I could not intervene in any way to help them, and they were typically very, very traumatic situations. So the first one was a little 8 or 9 year old girl, and she was in a basement, and I saw her abductor come into the basement in the dark. She had been looking for money. Now, these dreams were very clear, very vivid, sequential, lucid nightmares.
So you said that they felt different than your regular dreams. So
Right.
there's something different about it because they felt so clear.
They weren't the fuzzy, typical dreams that people have where everything's sort of disjointed and not too coherent. They were very clear, vivid, sequential, um, like watching a movie film.
Wow.
Very, very clear and very vivid. And this little girl, 8 or 9 year old Asian girl, was abducted in the basement. She had been looking for a dollar bill. She had left her brother and was looking for a dollar bill in the basement of a hotel when she was abducted. And the man that abducted her, I could see him. I could see his image. I could see his black gloves, and I could feel her pain when he threw her against the wall, picked her up. He had a rope. He tied her up to a pipe that ran across the bottom of the ceiling and hung her there. So that was, I mean, I woke up just diaphoretic, sweating, can't breathe, um, just a panic attack, a full blown panic attack. And that was the first one.
And what were you? How were you processing that information?
Well,
What?
I had a therapist that was following me at the time, and I told him about it. And he really, he really just told me that it may be some suppressed feelings from trauma in childhood. We didn't think much about it, but the dreams kept happening
Okay.
and kept happening.
Okay.
And initially it started with Asian people,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was more um, elderly people,
Mhm.
couples,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, it was like every week, every 2 weeks, sometimes twice in a week, I would have these horrible, horrible nightmares. And I finally heard from Mr. Jolly, my therapist. He said that there was a case out in California called the Night Stalker case.
And you didn't know about this case?
No, I hadn't. I don't watch the news. I think I was going to school at the time, working a full-time job, raising 3 kids. I wasn't thinking about, no, I had 2 kids at the time. And I became pregnant when all this was going on.
Mhm.
And the doctor had taken me off some medication. So we thought it could be, some problems developing from coming off the medication.
Right.
But the dreams were just so clear and so lucid. And my therapist had me start a dream diary.
Mm-hmm.
And we started keeping up with what was happening. And
Right.
my therapist was reading these like on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays when I would meet with him. He would read what was logged in the diary.
Uh-huh.
And he made a connection to this Night Stalker um, serial killings that were going on in Los Angeles, California, and I think it evolved and ended up in San Francisco or so.
So how similar were the cases of the Night Stalker and your dreams? When you started reading all these articles, how similar were
Well,
they?
I started paying attention
Right.
to the Night Stalker, and I did read them, and I was just floored by. I mean, my dreams seemed to have more detail in
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
than what I was reading in the news.
Right.
Because I could taste, my senses were intact in these
Right.
dreams. I could
Right.
taste, I could hear, I could smell. So it was, but seeing the type of people involved, for example, there was a young 9-year-old boy and his mother and father. The father was shot first. The young boy was sodomized and then tied to a chair. And he watched his mother be tortured. And this serial killer had also killed another woman, and he had taken her blood and drawn a pentagram on the wall with the words Jack the Killer on it. And he started using a lipstick also from his victims.
And how much of this matched your dreams? Is this what you were seeing in the dreams, or was this what was really happening in the reports, or was it both?
Both.
Yeah. So you actually saw those
I
details?
saw more details
Mm-hmm.
than what was being reported in the news.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they were so parallel that I couldn't really separate them.
Okay, so tell us, Susan's stories go beyond the clairvoyant to an experience that you had working in the nursing home, is that right?
I was 6 months pregnant, and we had a gentleman that was probably in his late 70s. He was in the nursing home. He was actually in the nursing home with dementia. And I was doing my rounds at 11 o'clock at night, and he normally was watching the news at 11. And I go into his room, and he's not breathing. He's unconscious. And I palpated for a pulse and could not find one. So I called 911, called a code, not called 911, called a code. And the room was filled with people. They resuscitated him. He was defibrillated twice. I was working the ambu bag to do the respirations for him. And we sent him over to the hospital, which was connected to the nursing home that I was working in at the time in Georgia. And so several days went by, and he was okay. He was in the hospital, and they sent him back to the nursing home. And when he came back to the nursing home, I went into his room and started to clean his mouth with a little toothette, little plastic sponge. And I'm working on him,
Mm-hmm.
and he looks up at me and says, Richie Ramirez is the one you're looking for. And I was like, I'm not looking for anybody. What are you talking about? And he says, Richie Ramirez, he's the one you're looking for. It didn't dawn on me at the time that that was anyhow related,
Mm-hmm.
and I dismissed it. Later in the course of that day, I started thinking about the connection to the serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
Ramirez was a Mexican name, and I was thinking California, Mexican. It was just too bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I talked to my therapist about this, and I was still having the nightmares. Things were still happening, and that was in March. And the nightmares went on until August.
Mm-hmm.
And then in August, and me having heard that name, Richie Ramirez, in August, the Los Angeles County Police posted a picture of a Ricardo Ramirez and associated him with the crimes. And they were looking on the lookout for this guy. And when I saw the image of this man, I knew without a doubt this was the man from my nightmares. This was the man I had been seeing night after night for months in my nightmares. And I was frightened. Like I say, I had been tormented. He eventually was captured, not by the police, but by citizens that saw his picture on a newspaper and chased him across several streets and held him down until the police got there. And he went to jail, and there were 13 victims that he was tried for having murdered. But there were probably 24 victims in my dreams, 24 different dreams.
Interesting.
And I just recently found out, and I mean recently as in since we talked about it, I recently found out that because the little Asian girl, the 9-year-old little Asian girl that I told you about was my first dream, that wasn't associated with any of his crimes. It just recently, like in the past year, became associated through the use of DNA.
Really?
So that one was the very first dream that I had. So, and I have to tell you, if you think that having premonitions or precognitions or clairvoyance is something you'd like to have, think about it again, because it was a nightmare. Like a nightmare, literally a nightmare. And I would wake up in these just tremors and can't breathe and feeling like I was being suffocated. I felt the pain of gunshot to my head. I'd have these excruciating pains as if I had been hit. It was just that dramatic. And I would not want to go through that again.